iPhone photos suck. It's titles like this that are likely why I will never get invited to Apple Park, but it's true. Everyone watching right now can likely tell which image on the screen was taken with an iPhone and which one wasn't. Common characteristics of phone photos make them look overprocessed, with flat lighting where none of the image exists in shadow or brightness, and far too much sharpening. And overall, it attempts to capture a great snapshot to look back on as a memory or to share with your loved ones because you can see everything in the image. But it's a far cry from the mood, emotion, or drama that you want to express in photography. The irony here is that phone photos can look fantastic. I spend every year pushing the limits of what these phones can do using the massive amounts of data that they capture. The catch is that to make a photo go from this to this, I have to have a PhD and bad posture while I waste away behind a computer screen editing those images. So, if phones are capable of creating these images, is there a way to do so without all of the editing? Do you remember those two photos that I started off the video with? I sure hope so. It was only like 20 seconds ago, and if you don't remember them, please get off TikTok and go outside and touch some grass. So what if I told you that the other photo, the one that I implied was not taken with an iPhone, was actually taken with an iPhone? Straight in camera, no editing required. Well, it's true. And the results are pretty sweet, I'd say. I've spent the last couple weeks researching and testing out different methods to accomplish this, and for me, there was one standout app that you've likely never heard of that does exactly what we want. Over the past year, I've been on a bit of a journey, exploring cameras that provide pleasing images straight out of camera with no editing, utilizing things like Fujifilm's film simulations or Nikon's recipes. Thus, my goal for this project was to find out if anything like that exists for the iPhone. Something that can capture the quality of what the iPhone is capable of while also giving some versatility in stylization or the look of the images as I'm taking them, similar to a recipe. I found quite a few options, and I've narrowed it down to 5 that we're going to talk about in this video. Halide is likely one of the most popular apps in this category, and we're specifically going to be using Halide Process 0. This produces 12 megapixel raw images without Apple's computational processing, and Halide claims that it produces natural film-like photos. We're also going to be using Procam's 0 process, which is just another camera control app that allows you to bypass Apple's processing, similar to Halide Process 0. Mood.camera came up a lot in my research, and we're going to be referring to it as just the Mood app, but it has a tagline of natural photos with authentic film character straight out of your iPhone. A quick glance at the interface, and this might be exactly what we're looking for. Another app that I found with very little written about it was called No Fusion, and with a quick look at that, it seems impressive with what it's capable of, claiming to be able to take 48 megapixel RAWs simultaneously with 48 megapixel JPEG images that have recipe applied. Lastly was Project Indigo. This is a beta project from Adobe that is trying to do something completely different than most of the other raw processing apps. Instead of not processing the images very much, it's doing a lot of processing, just differently than Apple. Sadly, at the time of filming this, it wasn't supported on the iPhone 17 Pro, but I still had my old iPhone 16 Pro with me, and I snapped at least one comparison image that we'll take a look at in the video. Over the course of our week in Olympic, I found myself taking test images using Halide, Mood, and No Fusion the most, along with Apple's camera app as well, of course, as our control for this entire video. Lastly, full disclaimer is I have zero affiliation with any of these apps. This is not sponsored by any of them, and I've never worked with any of them in any capacity. All of them do cost money, which I'm going to address later, but you can find all of them linked in the description at the bottom of the video, underneath the like button. The best way to show you what all of these apps are capable of is by just looking at the results. If you remember, this is straight out of the iPhone. It is using Apple's Photographic Styles, which we will touch on in a little bit, but this was the image that I took right in the field. And things you can look out for, again, are just over-sharpening, over-processing in the image. In this particular one, you can see that really nothing is existing in shadow. Take, for example, in comparison to what Halide captured. This has a lot more mood in it, and you can tell if we zoom in, obviously the resolution is slightly less because it's 12 megapixels rather than 24. On the left is the iPhone image, on the right is the Halide image. Obviously not zoomed in as much, but you can just tell there's so much more processing going on in the iPhone image. And the halide image does a really good job at actually having contrast, shadows, and brights within the image. But it is lacking a bit of style. It's kind of flat. And that is what we'll talk about continually throughout this video, is that while halide gives good results, these images are still meant to be edited. They are definitely more pleasing than what the iPhone image was taking, at least in this particular scene. But in other scenes, you'll see that it needs to be edited. Moving on, this is from the Mood.camera app. Now, this is a completely different look than the halide, and this is using one of its recipes or simulations that's in the app. The way the app is laid out is actually really nice. It's a beautifully done app. It's super easy to understand. You have basically different simulations, and then you have different settings for those simulations in terms of how much grain is going to be applied by changing the ISO value, and then also how the light is applied. If you want it more dynamic with more contrast, you can set that, or you can raise up the blacks and give a more film look. This particular simulation obviously raised the blacks. There's not as much contrast in the shadows. It has more of a red tint, but overall, I think that it does a pretty good job in terms of how it looks. And I actually really like the results from this particular simulation. We're going to talk about that in a little bit because I definitely have one major problem with the Mood app, but we're going to wait to talk about that. Next up is the No Fusion app, and this is actually the one that you saw at the beginning of the video that I said was taken with the iPhone. A lot of contrast, a lot of mood in this shot. And ironically, this is actually probably closer to what this scene looked like in person. There was a lot of shadow and brightness because my eyes were adjusted for very bright daylight and all of this area was in shadow. One thing you're going to notice about this, well, that's far too zoomed in, let's go to 100%, is that there's a bit of a glow within the image. And that is because Fusion allows you to add halation or bloom to the image with a setting. This is not taken using a bloom filter or anything like that. We're going to touch on that later. The biggest thing to notice here is how large this image is. It is 48 megapixels as a JPEG and not a RAW. But I did take both a RAW and JPEG at the same time. And it's actually one of the really cool things about No Fusion's pipeline is that it will take 48 megapixel RAW images and then turn them into JPEGs with whatever recipe you have applied. Also, I'm going to have an article link below where you can actually download some of the images for yourself. But within that article, there's going to be galleries of images from each of the apps so you can see what some of the results are and pixel peep to your heart's content. Or for the second comparison, I want to bring up and highlight Apple's Photographic Styles, which you might be sitting there wondering why we haven't talked about yet. And if you're unfamiliar, Apple's Photographic Styles were introduced on the iPhone 15, I believe, and it basically allows you to control and manipulate some of the tones, contrast, the colors, and it adds a bit of a look to the images a la like a film simulation or a recipe. The problem is, even if you push it pretty far, it still has a phone look to it. Let me show you. So this is the image that I took straight out of camera. I didn't manipulate the photographic style or anything on the phone, and it's really flat, like terribly flat and pretty boring. Compared to something like halide or ProCam's zero processing, and you could tell that this is definitely too flat. You'll also notice that the focal length is different. That was just an accident, but don't pay attention to details. We're not going to be pixel peeping this particular image. I really just want you to pay attention to things like shadow, contrast, styles, and the look of the image, not necessarily the detail. So what I did after I took this image is I went and I edited on my phone, but not editing like in Lightroom or anything like that. I just manipulated the photographic style on the phone, the same thing I could have done in the field. And I added as much contrast as I possibly could. And this is an image that I could have taken in the field had I done that. So I want to highlight that this is an image that you can take straight out of the camera with the phone. And this is also an image that you can take straight out of the camera natively just on the Apple iPhone using the photographic styles. And this definitely gets us closer to something more pleasing. The problem is it still has that overprocessed, sharpened look that I personally don't like. If we take a look at the Mood image, this is looking a lot closer to what I want. And you can see that it's just a far more stylized image that doesn't render and produce things that look over sharpened. It also, I think, adds grain. This is dependent on the settings that you choose within the app, which really helps make it not look like a phone photo. A bit of grain, not as sharpened, not as detailed, and not as artificial, if you will. Overall, I really like the vibe and mood of this particular image, but it's still not quite what I wanted when I was taking it. And that brings us to the no fusion image. And I really like, this is probably my favorite image from this set out of all of the apps, is how this image looks. And it's actually really needs to highlight one thing that's really cool about the no fusion app, is that you actually have 4 different settings for all the images you take that you can add this stylization to. Those settings are things like bloom. It has 3 different settings for that, 3 different intensities, well, 4 if you count off. It also has one for like lens distortion, which I never used in any of the photos. It has one for grain, and I think pretty much every photo I shot was using at least level 1 of grain. Maybe a few didn't have it. And lastly, it has a vignette control. And these are to mimic things like vintage lenses or characteristics of older cameras. You notice in this particular image, and that's why I brought it up, that there's a vignette implied. Very lightly to this, I think I only ever used level 1 of the vignette. But I actually really like the results because I typically add a vignette to my images anyways, and I think that it really brings down the brightness on the edges of the frame in a really subtle way that makes it look like it was not taken with a phone. Notice this image. Again, slightly different focal length, but you get the point. Also, when you zoom in here, there's a ton of detail within the image, and it's softer detail. It's not that over-sharpened, over-processed look. And a lot of this can be manipulated out in the field as you're editing the images. I just had a Freudian slip that I said editing the images, but I mean switching the different recipes and styles when you're out in the field. Also, if you're liking the content, give the video a like, but I would recommend not subscribing unless you connect with me or you enjoy this type of content. God knows you likely don't need another person in your subscription feed that you never watch again. So let's take a look at our third comparison. And I really want to talk about some of my issues with the Mood app for this particular comparison. So we'll take a look at the iPhone image first. It actually doesn't look too bad. Obviously it has a very fast shutter speed, and once we zoom in, you can really see, like I said, that process look. As an example, if we take a look at the halide image, look how less processed this looks. No sharpening, no extra processing going on, and it just has a much more natural feel. Also, another thing to point out here is just how similar the halide process 0 image is to the ProCam process 0 image. These are the two, they literally look like they could have been taken with the same app. And that's why I don't have a bunch of ProCam images in the comparisons here, because they pretty much produce very similar results. But now moving on, here are the 3 images that I took with the Mood camera app. And the reason I took 3 images, and this is my biggest problem with the Mood app, is that you can't preview the images. Meaning when you take the images or when you're out taking the images, you don't see what you're taking. And this is actually on purpose. So I watched some interviews and did some digging about the app, and the creator of the app really wants the app to feel like you're out taking film photos on your phone. And when you take film photos, you can't review them. So the idea here is that you select what film or simulation you're using, you dial in your settings, and it actually has a really nice guide of what those settings are doing, and it has an image, an example image up there, and you can scroll through some of those to see different examples. But the problem is you don't get a preview of the image that you're taking. So you have to snap the image, wait for it to process, and then go look to see what the results are. And this might be something that you're looking for. This might be something that you enjoy. But for me, a lot of my enjoyment of using recipes or using simulations is that I kind of get to craft the image and the editing right out in the field. When I walk up to a scene, I get to decide and make conscious decisions about how I want my image to look, depending on the recipe I'm using or film simulation when I'm shooting on something like my Nikon or Fujifilm cameras. So the Mood app, as great as it is, as simple as it is, and as much as I loved the interface and how you manipulated different recipes, the fact that I could not just stand there and see what my image was going to look like before I took it was incredibly frustrating, which sucks because I actually really enjoy the results that it produces when I get the right recipe and hone in on the right settings. So that is my criticisms of the Mood app. But again, I still took all the images throughout the week on the Mood app and still enjoyed the images that came out of it. but just not the process of it. All right, so next up, I just want to talk about the No Fusion app because this ended up being the app that I shot with the most over the weekend and the one that was producing the results that I liked while also having literally the most customization I've ever seen in a camera app. What's really cool about this is that you can take 48 megapixel RAWs and the 48 megapixel recipe images and change the pipeline of those RAWs. What I mean by that is most of the images that you're seeing in this video were taken using the 48 megapixel Pro RAW images and pipelined using Apple stuff, and then applying a recipe and saving it as a 48 megapixel JPEG as well. It's still getting rid of all of that sharpening and stuff because another setting that it has in it is you can change how it pipelines those JPEGs, removing the sharpening, changing how it does dynamics and highlights and shadows. And it's actually really cool. But you can also pipeline it with just the 12 megapixel Bayer images similar to Process Zero or the Procam apps, and then turn it into a recipe image. But overall, my experience with not only using the app, but also the results from the app were fantastic. I mean, some of my favorite shots I took were from the No Fusion app. Like this one, for example. This was taken on the Apple iPhone, and this is just straight out of the camera app. And actually, this is not a bad image. I like this particular image, but it still has that process look. It doesn't really allow things to be in shadow. There's obviously some shadow and darkness right down here, but it still has those really bright, sharpened highlights, and everything just looks a little bit too artificial. But as soon as you go to the No Fusion image, this just looks so much more natural. This looks like an image that I would take on my Fuji or Nikon using a recipe with no editing applied. I could actually probably post this online. I don't know if anyone could tell that it was taken with a phone. I guess maybe if you were super pixel peeping, but there's even so much detail in here when you zoom in because it's a 48 megapixel JPEG. And again, technically it's an HEIC. I'm just saying JPEG so that I can discern between the difference of RAW and JPEG image. And this just looks great, straight out of the camera from my phone. Here's another example. This is from the iPhone. This is from Halide. And again, you can tell this particular Halide image definitely needs some editing to it. It's a bit too bright. And you could probably just bring down the exposure and maybe make it look a little bit more contrasty. But this is an image that you are expected to edit. And this is the No Fusion image. It just has so much more character to it straight out of the iPhone. The best part is No Fusion even allows you to create your own recipes. You can actually import LUTs from other people. And it does all of this within the same app. Now, I didn't create my own recipes. I just used their built-in ones. They have different Hasselblad ones, Leica, they have Kodak stuff, portrait stuff. They have a ton of stuff in there. A lot of the times I was just flipping through them to see which style looked like what I wanted to look like when I was out in the field. They even have a film negative button, which allows you to just take the raw images with little processing, similar to something like Halide's Process Zero. There's a lot to the app that I could probably make an entire video on, and maybe I would. Let me know in the comments down below if you think that's something you would like to watch. But I will leave it up to you to download and try for yourself. Like I said, I'm gonna have all of these linked down below for you to try, but I really think that the No Fusion app came as a huge big surprise because hadn't read anything about it or saw anything about it online, and it ended up blowing me away. Oh, your photos from Colorado. You finally got them on your computer.
I did.
These are beautiful.
Thanks.
Now, something I've been wondering since you've been shooting for over a year now is that all of your memories and all the photos that you've taken are on this laptop, right? Mm-hmm. So, are they anywhere else or are they only on this laptop?
No, I keep them all here.
Oh, so that means that if something happens to your laptop, you're gonna lose all of your memories and photos from the last year and a half.
Yeah.
Don't let this happen to you and take control of your data backups with the help of today's sponsor, UGREEN. UGREEN sent me their NASync DH4300 Plus, which is a 4-bay home storage unit. If you're unfamiliar with a device like this, essentially you throw some beefy hard drives like these 20 terabyte drives that I have, or smaller ones depending on your data needs, and configure them with one level of redundancy. That means that your data is backed up twice within the unit, and if one of your hard drives fails, you don't lose all of your precious photos. This can be a great solution to backing up all of your images or replacing costly monthly cloud storage prices. If this sounds complicated, don't worry. The DH4300 Plus makes it super easy for even beginners. Using its built-in NFC chip, you can tap your phone to it, connect through UGREEN's app, and in less than 2 minutes of setup, you've got data redundancy. The DH4300 Plus is equipped with a 2.5 gigahertz network port for faster transfers. You can set it up to back up all of your phone photos over the Wi-Fi, and you can even access it remotely when you're not at home. And there's even a built-in AI album assistant that can intelligently identify and classify people and places to save you time when searching your own library. Don't risk losing all of your precious photos and get control of your data today with UGREENNAS NAS-Sync DH4300 Plus. Click the link in the description or use this QR code that you can see on the screen now. Using this is going to save you quite a bit of money, but it's also going to help directly support this channel. Thanks again to UGREEN for sponsoring this video. All right, really quick, let's take a look at a Project Indigo image. Yesterday, literally, it got added to support for the iPhone 17 Pro. So I went out and took an image only on the iPhone 17 Pro for comparison. This one is the Apple image. This one is the halide image. Again, meets the characteristic that probably needs a bit of processing, a bit of editing. And this is the Project Indigo image. Now, I only got to take a few example images from Project Indigo, but I don't quite know what its goals are. A lot of the images that it takes when you shoot in RAW are all HDR tone mapped, and that means when I bring them into Lightroom on my MacBook, I can see the really bright spots of highlights and stuff. But from my scope, what I wanted from an app, it's not doing what I want. It, I think, from what I can tell, is taking images that I'm still supposed to go and work on. I mean, it is Adobe after all, and they make things like Lightroom and Photoshop, so it makes sense that the images that it's taking are processed differently, but you still need to probably go and edit them. And for completion's sake, this was the Mood.camera app image of the same scene, and this was the No Fusion image. And I actually probably like the Mood.camera app just because I must have had some kind of higher saturated setting going on in terms of its simulation. I think it looks pretty good, but overall I actually think the iPhone image doesn't look terrible, but it still has that ridiculously over-sharpened look. And as soon as you start looking at other images that the iPhone took with a different app, I like all of the other ones better. So like I said in the beginning of the video, all of these apps cost money outside of Project Indigo, which is still in beta, but who really knows if it'll become part of Adobe's subscription service once it comes out of beta. So I'm not saying it's free, even though it currently is free to try. Each app does have a trial period and uses a monthly or yearly subscription service, but they also all offer a lifetime thing. I think the trial is great since you can just download these and try them out for a week, or even the monthly subscription if you want to just use it for a month and decide if you're going to keep using it or not. But I think I can all agree or guess that we all hate subscriptions. So I'm just going to tell you the lifetime price. Halide is $60, the Mood.camera app is $15, ProCam is $10, and No Fusion is $30. Overall, each of these apps might be the one for you, and then I hope I've done them justice even if you were not looking for what I was looking for. No Fusion is the standout for me, doing exactly what I was looking for and doing it better than I would probably do myself if I was making the app, allowing me to take higher resolution images with recipes applied directly, giving my images enjoyable aesthetics and moods without touching a single slider. I've already bought the app myself, and if you do plan on using it, be sure to add a widget to your home screen so you can open the app instantly, just like you're probably familiar with the native camera app on Apple's iPhone. If this was helpful to you, like the video and consider subscribing, but only if you really loved it or love the content that I'm producing. Thank you for being here. There's got to be a rainbow out there somewhere. We just got to go find them. I'll see you on the next one. Later.